Today I will tell you a story about the Sunday dinner that changed the way I looked at my own daughter. It was supposed to be an evening of warmth, of laughter echoing across the long wooden table that had carried our family meals for decades. Instead, it became the moment when silence felt heavier than any spoken word, the moment when I first realized something precious was about to be tested. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 68 years old and a widow. For more than 30 years, I have lived on this estate in Napa Valley, a place where every row of vines and every stone wall tells the story of my late husband and the family we built together. This house is not just walls and windows. It is memory. It is legacy. It is love carved into the land. That Sunday, I prepared dinner the way I always do. The roast chicken browned in the oven. The scent of rosemary and garlic lingered in the air. Fresh bread cooled on the counter, and the table was set with my grandmother's china. I wanted it to feel whole, to feel like the kind of evening where family could sit, eat, and remember what matters most. Melissa arrived first, my only daughter. She walked in wearing a tailored blouse, her hair swept back too tightly, as though she had spent more time preparing for a meeting than for a meal with her mother. Behind her came Daniel, her husband. His smile was brief, his eyes quick, scanning the room as though evaluating assets. They carried themselves with a certain distance, a coolness that did not belong in a family home. I greeted them with open arms. Melissa kissed my cheek lightly. Daniel shook my hand, firm but detached. Almost immediately, they began talking to each other about investment opportunities, projects in the city, and deadlines that loomed. Their voices held numbers instead of affection. Their words filled the space, but left me feeling as though I were already excluded. Grace, my housekeeper and companion for over 20 years, moved quietly in the background. She placed the bread basket on the table, poured water into glasses, and observed the exchange with sharp, knowing eyes. She has always sensed storms before they arrived. That evening, her silence spoke louder than words. We sat at the table. The silverware gleamed under candlelight. The plates filled with food, but there was no warmth in the air. I tried to guide the conversation toward simple things: Melissa's health, the vines that were ripening early that year, memories of her childhood running across the fields. She answered, but quickly returned to Daniel's projects, his ventures, his needs. The more they spoke, the more I felt the rhythm of our Sunday ritual slipping away. Each mention of profit and strategy pulled the evening further from the heart of family and deeper into something calculated. I watched Melissa's face as she leaned toward Daniel, echoing his words, nodding at his plans, and I felt an ache grow inside me. It was the ache of a mother watching her daughter walk further and further down a path where family meant little and ambition meant everything. Grace paused by the doorway, her hands folded. She caught my gaze and gave a small, subtle shake of her head. It was her way of telling me what I already knew. Something was coming, something that would test not just the strength of our bond, but the very foundation of this house. The food sat on our plates, untouched for longer than it should have. The room was filled with the scent of the meal, yet I tasted only unease. My fork rested in my hand, but my thoughts drifted. The candles flickered harder, their shadows stretching across Melissa's face, making her features look sharper, colder. I could feel it then, the first signs of a storm pressing at the edges of the table. I did not know the words she would soon choose, nor the cruelty of their weight, but in my bones I knew. The evening was no longer about family. It was about to become something else entirely. Melissa set her glass down with a sharp clink against the polished wood, and in that instant, the room seemed to contract around us. Her eyes were steady, her voice sharper than the blade of the carving knife resting beside the turkey. She looked directly at me, not as a daughter speaks to a mother, but as someone making a business transaction. "Mom, Daniel and I have talked it through. The estate will be sold. His company needs capital, and $53 million is the right figure." The air left the room. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No clatter of forks, no hum of conversation. Only silence so complete it roared in my ears. Daniel leaned back, lips pressed into a line of grim certainty. He nodded once, as though confirming the conclusion of a deal already signed. His hand rested on the back of Melissa's chair, a gesture meant to claim authority. His expression told me he believed this estate, my life's work, was nothing more than an asset to be liquidated. Grace froze in her tracks. The silver spoon slipped from her hand and rang against the hardwood floor, a metallic echo that seemed to mark the death of civility. She bent quickly to retrieve it, but her wide eyes never left Melissa. I saw the horror in them, the disbelief of a woman who had served this family longer than Daniel had even known our name. I sat straighter in my chair, my back firm against the carved wood. I kept my face composed, though I felt my chest tighten. My eyes, however, betrayed me. They sparked with the cold fire of recognition. I had waited for this. Not this exact moment, not these exact words, but I had known that greed would one day find its way to my table. Daniel broke the silence first. "It is the logical step," he said smoothly. "Your upkeep is costly. The land is worth more than its sentiment. With the market at its peak, we can secure an extraordinary return. My company needs stability, and this estate provides it." His words cut deeper than he understood. Stability was what my husband and I had built here, vine by vine, brick by brick. To hear that stability twisted into justification for stripping me of my home was enough to make my hands tremble under the table. But I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Melissa placed her hand over his, echoing his tone. "Mom, it is practical. You don't need this much space anymore. Daniel is under pressure. Investors are waiting. If you love me, you'll agree. This is not about taking from you. It's about securing a future for our family." The audacity of her words tightened my jaw. My estate, earned through years of sacrifice, suddenly rebranded as their salvation. My love for her being twisted into a weapon to corner me. I studied her face, my daughter, the girl I once rocked to sleep, now rehearsing a speech that did not come from her heart, but from the man at her side. I let the silence linger. It was not weakness, it was strategy. Let them sit in it. Let them mistake it for hesitation. Daniel leaned forward, mistaking my quiet for doubt. $53 million solves everything, he pressed. Debts cleared, expansion secured. We can finally move forward. His tone was firm, but beneath it was desperation. I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. He needed this estate more than he admitted. Grace finally spoke, her voice breaking the brittle stillness. "Miss Melissa," she said, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Do you hear yourself? Do you know what you are saying to your mother?" Melissa turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Grace, this is family business. Stay out of it." The cruelty in her tone landed harder than the words themselves. Grace recoiled slightly but did not retreat. Her presence in the room reminded me that I was not entirely alone, though the betrayal burned hotter for it. I drew a breath, slow and deliberate. My heart hammered, but my voice, when it came, was steady. "So this is what you came here for. Not dinner, not family. You came with numbers and plans already decided." Melissa shifted in her chair, but Daniel held his ground. "We came with reality," he said. "You can resist, but it changes nothing. This estate is too valuable to sit idle. It must serve the next generation." The next generation. His words dripped with entitlement. My daughter sat beside him, silent now, letting his voice carry her intent. I felt the sting of that silence more than any accusation. I looked at her directly. "Melissa, is this truly what you believe? That my home, my life's work, should be sold to patch the holes in his business?" She met my eyes, and for a fleeting second, I saw hesitation. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Yes, it's the only way forward." The declaration landed like a blow. My heart clenched, but I refused to let it show. I tightened my grip on the arms of my chair and held her gaze until she looked away. The daughter I had raised, the woman I had believed would protect what was left of our family's soul, was now the mouthpiece for a man drowning in debt and pride. Daniel cleared his throat, sensing her falter. "You cannot stop this. The market is ready and buyers are waiting. We can make this quick and clean if you cooperate, or we can make it messy. The choice is yours." The threat in his words was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. My blood chilled, yet my resolve solidified. If he believed intimidation would bend me, he knew nothing of the woman who had built this life from sacrifice. Grace's spoon clattered once more as she set it deliberately on the table. Her hands shook, but her eyes met mine with fierce loyalty. She did not need to speak. Her silence carried a promise. She stood with me. I inhaled deeply, pressing down the surge of pain and anger. The betrayal was sharp, but I was not broken. I had seen enough to prepare for this night. And as I sat at that table, staring at my daughter and her husband, I knew the storm had only begun. I did not flinch when Daniel tried to press me with his threats, nor when Melissa's eyes hardened as if she believed I would crumble under her words. Instead, I rose from my chair with measured control, each step echoing on the polished floor. My hand moved to the leather purse I had kept near the sideboard. They watched me with curiosity, perhaps even with expectation that I would give them the answer they demanded. I pulled out a cream-colored envelope. My fingers brushed its edges with certainty. I walked back to the table, set it down between the platters of untouched food, and slid it directly in front of Melissa. My voice was steady, stripped of warmth, but sharpened with steel. "Since you are making announcements, then here is mine." The words fell into the silence like a gavel striking wood. Melissa's hand hovered above the envelope. For the first time that evening, I saw hesitation in her. Daniel leaned forward, suspicion flashing in his eyes. Melissa's fingers trembled as she lifted the flap. She pulled out the documents, unfolding them slowly, as though she feared the paper might burn her hands. Her lips parted. Her breath caught. She read once, then again, her eyes darting over the signatures and seals. Her face drained of color. Daniel reached across and snatched the pages. His expression shifted from arrogance to disbelief, then to fury. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rougher now, the mask of composure slipping. I kept my gaze steady. "Those are the trust documents. This estate was placed into the Evelyn Carter Trust months ago. It is no longer mine to sell, nor Melissa's, nor yours. It belongs to the trust, managed under conditions you cannot alter." The weight of my words settled over the table. Daniel's jaw tightened. His fingers crumpled the edge of the papers, as though force alone could undo legal ink. Melissa looked at me, her voice breaking with confusion. You planned this? You didn't even tell me?" "I had no obligation to tell you," I replied coldly. "I had an obligation to protect what your father and I built. I saw the direction you were going. I knew the day would come when you would let ambition blind you. So I acted before you could." Grace let out a breath she had been holding. Her hand pressed against her chest, her eyes glistening, not with sorrow, but with relief. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "Mrs. Carter did what she had to do. She safeguarded the legacy this house carries." Daniel slammed the papers on the table. The plates rattled. "You think this piece of paper can stop me? You think some trust can keep me from what is rightfully Melissa's? This is her inheritance. She has the right to choose." I leaned forward, meeting his glare without a trace of fear. Inheritance is not entitlement. Legacy is not a bargaining chip. You married my daughter, not my estate. If your company is collapsing, that is your failure to carry, not mine to rescue. Melissa's face contorted between anger and shame. She pushed the papers back toward me. "Mom, you went behind my back. You never trusted me. You've humiliated me in front of my husband." Her words pierced me, but I refused to bend. "No, Melissa, you humiliated yourself by letting him speak for you, by sitting here and treating your family home as collateral. You may think I betrayed you by acting in silence, but the true betrayal is yours, and you made it with your own voice." Grace stepped closer, her tone cutting. "Melissa, do you realize what you've done tonight? You asked your mother to erase her own life for the sake of someone else's debts." Melissa shot her a glare, but her words faltered. Daniel cut in quickly, his voice rising. "Enough of this. I will find another way to challenge it. Courts can be swayed. Trusts can be broken. Do not think for one moment that this is over." I straightened, my chin lifted. "Then try." Every paper in that envelope was reviewed by the strongest attorney in this state. Every clause is iron. If you think your threats frighten me, you underestimate who I am." The fire in my voice startled even Melissa. She recoiled slightly, her lips pressed tight, her bravado weakening. Daniel clenched his fists, but there was no strike left to land. The first blow had already been dealt, and it was mine. The candles flickered harder as though reflecting the storm inside the room. The roasted chicken grew cold. The bread sat untouched. The dining hall no longer felt like a place for family, but a battlefield where silence and paper carried more weight than any weapon. Melissa finally spoke again, her voice small, stripped of the sharp edge she had wielded earlier. "So you never trusted me. You prepared for this day, waiting for me to fail you." I looked at her, my eyes softening for a brief second before hardening again. I trusted the daughter I raised, but the woman sitting before me tonight is not her. I had to prepare for her absence. Daniel shoved his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor with a screech. He stood over me, his anger raw. "You've ruined everything. Do you understand what you've done?" I rose slowly, my movements calm, controlled. "Yes," I said firmly. "I protected my home. I protected myself. And I reminded both of you that family cannot be bought, sold, or mortgaged to cover mistakes." The weight of the moment settled again, thicker than before. Melissa stared at me with wide eyes, Daniel seething beside her, and Grace standing resolute like a silent sentinel at my side. The first strike of this war was not theirs, but mine, carried in the folds of a simple cream envelope. The battle lines had been drawn, and though they thought they could strip me of my home, they had just learned that I was not the kind of woman who surrendered. Daniel's mask cracked before my eyes, his hand tightened into a fist against the table, his composure slipping like glass under strain. His voice came out louder, harsher, the polished businessman veneer stripped away. "Fine," he barked, slamming his palm flat on the wood. "You want the truth? My company is drowning. We are millions underwater. Investors are circling like vultures. If I do not secure collateral now, I lose everything. Everything." His chest heaved, the sweat forming at his brow betraying the panic beneath his anger. Melissa turned towards him sharply, shock flashing across her features. She had not expected this confession to fall so raw in front of me. Grace's lips parted, her breath caught as if the weight of his words pressed down on her chest. She clutched the back of a chair, steadying herself. Daniel pressed on, desperate now. "You think this house is a treasure? To me, it is leverage. With this estate tied to the company, banks will listen. Investors will double their support. Without it, I am finished. Do you hear me? Finished." The word rang across the hall, bouncing against the high ceilings and back into the silence that followed. Melissa tried to recover, her voice softer, pleading. "Mom, you do not need this estate. You live here alone. The land, the house, it is too much for you. Daniel's company could flourish with it. Why hold on to something you cannot possibly use all by yourself?" I turned to her slowly, my expression firm. "Alone, yes, but never solitary. Never. Do you think empty rooms mean an empty life? This estate is not excess. It is memory, sacrifice, and legacy. It is the vineyard your father tended in the blazing sun. It is the walls I held you against when you were sick as a child. It is the soil of our name. Do not call it too much, Melissa. Do not reduce it to a cheap exchange." Her lips tightened, shame flickering but quickly smothered by Daniel's looming presence. Daniel leaned forward again, his voice rising, cracking under the strain. "Legacy does not pay debt. Legacy does not keep my company alive. What good is a vineyard when the world is moving to technology, when everything is digital? You are clinging to dust, Evelyn, while I fight to build the future." I felt the words like acid, but I refused to let them burn through me. My reply came sharp, like steel. "The future you speak of is built on sand. You gamble, Daniel. You burn through money and call it innovation. And now you reach for what is not yours to steady your sinking ship. But this home will not be the life raft you cling to." I will not allow it. Grace stepped closer, her voice trembling with restrained fury. How dare you? This house is not yours to take, not yours to risk. You sit here demanding it like a right, when all you've brought into this family is debt. Daniel shot her a look of contempt. Stay silent, Grace. You are staff, not family. Her face flushed red, but she did not back down. I have served this house longer than you have known Melissa. I have guarded it with more loyalty than you have shown her. If that does not make me family, then I do not know what does. Melissa's voice broke through, strained with panic. Stop this, both of you. Daniel is under pressure. He is fighting battles you do not understand. She turned to me again, her tone almost begging. Mom, please, think about the bigger picture. Think about what we could achieve with this estate turned into something greater. I narrowed my eyes at her, my heart twisting. Greater. You call selling your heritage greater? You call throwing away a lifetime for a man's failing company greater? Do not mistake his desperation for vision, Melissa. It is ruin wearing the mask of progress. Daniel's fist struck the table again. The china rattled, wine splashed over the rim of his glass. You are blind. Without this, I am finished. And if I fall, Melissa falls with me. Do you want your daughter ruined because of your stubbornness? The audacity of his words seared through me. He dared to twist my love for her into a weapon. I drew a sharp breath, my reply cutting. Do not mistake manipulation for love. If you fall, it is because of your own choices. I will not sacrifice my home, my life's work, to cover the cracks in yours. Melissa's face crumpled, torn between loyalty to her husband and the shame of standing against me. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, straightening her shoulders as if forcing herself to be harder. You don't understand, she said, her voice brittle. This estate, it is just walls and land. You cling to it because you are afraid of change. Daniel is offering us a chance to be part of something bigger. I cut her off, my voice ringing with finality. Walls and land? No, Melissa. This is blood and history. This is every sacrifice your father and I made so you could have the life you do. If you see only profit when you look at these fields, then you have already lost something far greater than any company could give you. Daniel snarled, his composure shattered. You think you've won because of your trust documents. You think you can stop me. But money bends everything. Lawyers, banks, courts. I will find a way. I met his fury with calm defiance. And I will be waiting, Daniel, because the truth always stands longer than lies. Your debts will swallow you whole before this house ever does. The silence that followed was suffocating. Melissa stared at the papers still lying on the table, her hands clenched tight. Grace stood behind me, her presence steady, her loyalty unwavering. Daniel seethed in his chair, a man exposed, his empire revealed as nothing but smoke and ruin. The first cracks had split wide open. Their plan was no longer coded in charm or reason. It lay bare, naked in its desperation. And I knew then, this was only the beginning of their unraveling. Melissa's tears spilled fast, catching the glow of the candles as they ran down her cheeks. Her voice broke, trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. You are selfish, Mom. You have never loved me the way I needed. If you did, you would not stand in my way now. You would not humiliate me like this. The words pierced sharper than any knife, but I did not let my face falter. Inside, my chest tightened, the ache of hearing my own child weaponize love against me. Still, my reply came measured, cutting through her sobs like tempered steel. Love does not mean I allow you to trample over the life your father and I built with our bare hands. Love does not mean I hand over my soul so you can satisfy his debts. Melissa shook her head violently, slamming her hand against the table. You care more about bricks and vines than about your daughter. Everything you ever did was about the house, about the vineyard, about Dad's legacy. What about me? Did you ever think about me? I leaned forward, my voice firm. I thought about you every day, Melissa. I carried you, raised you, gave you everything I could, but I will not confuse love with surrender. You do not ask for my care tonight. You demand my destruction, and that I will not give. Daniel cut in before she could answer, his words laced with venom. If you truly loved her, Evelyn, you would sign those papers without hesitation. A mother does not cling to property when her daughter's future is at stake. I turned my gaze to him, unwavering. Do not speak to me about motherhood, Daniel. You know nothing of it. A mother protects her child, yes, but she also protects her child from ruin. You are the ruin, and I will not feed it with my home. Melissa's sobs turned raw, her face contorted with bitterness. She pointed a trembling finger at me. This is why I never felt enough for you. You always held something above me. This estate, Dad's memory, your precious traditions. Now you choose them again, over me. Her words stung with cruel precision, but beneath them I saw the shadow of the man beside her, the way Daniel's hand pressed against her back, guiding, controlling, fueling her accusations. My daughter's voice, but his script. Grace could no longer hold her tongue. She stepped forward, her voice quivering with restrained rage. Enough, Melissa, you dishonor your father's name, and you— She turned her glare on Daniel, her tone sharp as glass. You drag this family into the mud. If Mr. Carter were here, he would hang his head in shame at the spectacle before me. Daniel snapped his head toward her, eyes blazing. You have no right to speak his name. You are a servant. Grace squared her shoulders, her voice ringing with conviction. I served this family with loyalty longer than you have drawn breath in this house. I was here when Melissa was a child running through the vines, when her father poured his heart into this land. Do not dare to tell me I do not have the right to defend his memory. Melissa's sobs quieted, but her anger remained. She looked at Grace with resentment, then turned back to me. Mom, please, don't make me choose. If you loved me, you would trust me, just this once. I inhaled deeply, the air heavy in my lungs. My heart wanted to cradle her, to soothe the storm inside her, but I knew love without boundaries was not love at all. My voice came steady, final. Melissa, I do love you. That is why I will not let you trade everything your father and I bled for into the hands of a man who sees it only as collateral. If that feels like rejection to you, then you do not understand love. Not yet. Daniel's patience shattered. He slammed his fist against the table so hard the silverware jumped. You sit here cloaked in righteousness, but you are nothing more than an old woman too stubborn to face reality. You would rather watch your daughter's life collapse than lift a pen to help her. That is not love. That is cruelty. My eyes burned, not with tears, but with defiance. No, Daniel. Cruelty is what you do, dragging my daughter into your failures, making her beg for what you cannot earn, turning her against her own mother for your salvation. That is cruelty. Grace's voice broke in again, stronger now, almost shaking. Melissa, look at him. Look at what he has become. He would gut your mother's life without a blink, and he would do the same to you if it served him. Melissa covered her ears for a moment, as though the truth was too loud to bear. Her tears streaked her face, her shoulders trembling. Stop it, all of you. Just stop. I cannot listen. But silence did not return. The tension pulsed, filling the room like thunder waiting to break. I kept my gaze locked on her, refusing to let her escape the weight of what she had chosen tonight. You can cry. You can accuse me. You can let him speak for you, I said firmly. But you will not take this estate from me. You call me selfish. But selfishness is asking your mother to give up her life's work to cover a stranger's debt. Selfishness is calling love a transaction, and I will not play that game. Melissa's sobs turned into uneven breaths, her eyes red, her shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. Daniel glared at me, fury simmering, his plans crumbling in plain sight. Grace stood tall behind me, unwavering, her voice and presence anchoring me in the storm. The confrontation had torn open every wound between mother and daughter, every scar left by grief, ambition, and unmet expectations. And yet, even as Melissa cried and Daniel seethed, I knew this was only the surface. Beneath it all, deeper truths still waited to be revealed. The dinner had become a battleground, and in that battleground, the first true war between mother and daughter had erupted, with love twisted into accusation and loyalty fractured by greed. Grace's voice cut through the heavy silence, sharp enough to make Melissa flinch. "I have watched you since you were a child, Melissa. I know why you cling so hard to this man and his promises. It is not just about his company. It is about you, always needing to prove you are perfect, that you belong above everyone else." Melissa's tear-streaked face twisted with anger. "You don't know anything about me. You're just a housekeeper. Stay out of this." But Grace stood her ground, her chin lifted with defiance. "I know enough. I saw it when you were 10, running home in tears because those wealthy girls in town laughed at your shoes. They told you you would never be like them, never have what they had. I was the one who sat with you while you cried. I remember you swearing that one day you would show them. One day you would outshine them all." Melissa's lips trembled, her eyes darting toward me, then away. Daniel stiffened beside her, his jaw tightening. Grace pressed on, her voice steady, unwavering. "From that moment, you chased perfection like it was oxygen. Every grade, every award, every choice. You needed the world to believe you were flawless. And when you met Daniel, you thought he was the ticket. The successful husband, the wealth, the status. You thought with him by your side, no one could laugh at you again." I felt a pang in my chest as the memories stirred. I remembered that night. I remembered holding her, brushing her hair from her face, telling her she was enough as she was. She had nodded then, but her eyes had burned with something deeper, something I had not fully understood until now. Melissa slammed her fist against the table, her voice breaking. "Stop it! You make me sound weak. I am not weak. I deserve more than this life of smallness. I was never going to settle for less." Daniel placed a hand on her arm, trying to steady her, but it looked more like control than comfort. "You are not weak," he muttered. "Don't let her twist this." Grace's tone softened, though the truth in her words remained piercing. "You are not weak, Melissa, but you are lost. You took the pain of being dismissed as a child and turned it into cruelty. Instead of proving your worth through kindness, through strength of heart, you chained yourself to money and to men who promise it. That is why you sit here now, attacking your own mother for the sake of debt." Melissa shook her head, tears streaking her face again. "You don't understand what it's like, to always be compared, to always hear, 'She's not enough.' You don't know what that does to someone." I leaned forward then, my voice low but cutting. "I know, Melissa. I know more than you think. I saw the way you looked at those girls. I saw how you carried that shame like a scar, but I also gave you everything I could to show you your value. I gave you love, stability, a home built with sacrifice. I could not erase their cruelty, but I tried to fill you with enough light to fight it. And tonight, you choose darkness instead." Melissa's chest rose and fell quickly, her breath uneven. "What good is love when the world laughs at you? What good is home when people think you're nothing?" Daniel seized the opening, his tone sharp. "Exactly. This estate could silence all of that. With it, we command respect. Without it, you stay the woman who was laughed at for her shoes." His words were venom, wrapping around her wound and pulling it open wider. I felt fury rise in me, but I forced it into steel. Respect bought with money is not respect at all. And if you think selling your soul will heal that little girl's shame, you are wrong. It will only deepen the hole inside you. Grace's eyes shone with fire as she turned on Daniel. "You feed her fears. You exploit the child she once was, the girl desperate to be enough. You do not love her. You use her." Melissa snapped back, her voice raw. "No, he loves me. He understands me. He gives me the life I deserve." I answered her gently but firmly. "No, Melissa. He gives you mirrors to cover the cracks. He gives you glitter to hide the emptiness. That is not love. That is dependency. And tonight, he nearly convinced you to sacrifice the last piece of your father's legacy to fill a hole no money can fill." Her shoulders slumped, but defiance lingered in her eyes. "Maybe I need that hole filled. Maybe I need more than love and memory. Maybe I need power." The room went silent again, heavy with the admission. Grace shook her head slowly, whispering, "Power at the cost of your mother's heart is not power. It is poison." I looked at my daughter, my only child, and in that moment I felt both sorrow and fury. Sorrow for the little girl still chasing the laughter of strangers, and fury at the woman who had twisted that wound into cruelty toward me. My voice came strong, final. "Melissa, I cannot heal the child inside you who felt less than others, but I will not let that child destroy this home. If you choose to hate me for that, so be it. But one day, you will see that I was the only one who refused to feed the wound with lies." Melissa's sobs returned, quieter now, her strength leaking away. Daniel glared, seething, but the foundation of their plan had cracked. The truth had been spoken out loud, stripped bare by Grace, and no denial could erase it. The room had shifted. Melissa's motives, her fears, her obsession with being perfect, they were all exposed. And while the audience of this painful theater might feel pity for her scars, they could not excuse the cruelty she had chosen. The storm had deepened, but now it carried a new weight. The truth of why my daughter had turned against me. And though it broke my heart, I knew the fight was far from over. Daniel's face twisted, red with rage and desperation. His hand shot into his pocket, pulling out his phone with the speed of a man who saw the walls closing in. He jabbed at the screen, his voice sharp as glass. "I'll end this right now. I'll have my attorney file immediately. We'll challenge this trust. We'll prove you're incompetent, Evelyn. The court will see you're old, confused, no longer fit to manage an estate of this size. Once you're declared unfit, the estate goes back into Melissa's hands, and then finally, into mine." The venom in his tone was not just anger, it was strategy, raw and exposed. His thumb hovered over the call button as he lifted the phone to his ear. Melissa sat frozen beside him, her eyes swollen from tears, her lips trembling, but she did not stop him. She stared at the table, silent, as if surrender had already taken root. Grace gasped audibly, her hand clapping against her mouth. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered, but Daniel's smirk told us he already had. I sat back in my chair, spine straight, eyes fixed on him. My voice came out low, calm, slicing through his arrogance. "Go ahead. Call. Drag me into court. Do what desperate men do when their world collapses. But remember this, I am always several steps ahead of you." He barked a laugh, brittle and hollow. "You think you're untouchable? The law bends with pressure. Judges see frail widows and fragile memories. I'll show them a woman too old to run an empire. I'll show them you're clinging to the past while the world moves forward." I raised an eyebrow, my lips curling into the faintest trace of a smile. "And I will show them medical records, evaluations signed by physicians who have documented my health for years. I will show them I am sharper than the man accusing me. If you want to put me on the stand, Daniel, be my guest. The only one who will look unfit is you." His jaw clenched, his hand tightening around the phone. He lowered it slightly, suspicion crossing his face. You prepared for this?" I leaned forward, letting the fire in my eyes meet his head on. "I told you. I always prepare. You thought I didn't see this coming? You thought I would leave my life's work unguarded, vulnerable to vultures circling overhead? You underestimate me because you think age equals weakness. That mistake will destroy you." Melissa shifted in her seat, her silence screaming louder than any words. She pressed her palms together, her eyes darting between Daniel and me, but still she did not stop him. Her loyalty remained chained to him, even as he dragged her deeper into the mire. Grace finally snapped, her voice shaking with fury. "Mr. Carter would weep if he saw this. He built this estate with his hands, with his blood, with his dreams. And you," she jabbed a finger toward Daniel, "you sit here, plotting to call his wife unfit, to strip her of everything. Do you have no shame? No soul?" Daniel sneered at her, his voice dripping with contempt. "Spare me your moral speeches. This is business. This is survival. Sentiment doesn't keep companies alive." I shot back instantly, my tone sharp. "Neither does fraud. Neither does deceit. You gamble with lives, with promises you cannot keep, and now you think the law will rescue you. But I've seen your kind before. You climb fast, you burn fast, and you fall even faster. Drag me to court, Daniel. The only man who will walk out exposed is you." Melissa's voice cracked suddenly, soft but cutting. "Daniel, what if she's right?" He snapped his head toward her, fury blazing. "Don't you dare start doubting me now. She is manipulating you just as she always has. She wants to keep you small, to keep you under her roof, under her rules. Do you want to live as her shadow forever, or do you want to finally stand above her?" Melissa swallowed hard, her hands trembling, but she said nothing more. Her silence was her answer. I let my gaze settle on her, softer for a moment. "Melissa, listen to yourself. You sit there and let him use you as a weapon against me. You know me better than anyone. Does this sound like the mother who raised you? Or does this sound like a man so cornered he will scorch the earth to save himself?" She closed her eyes, her lips pressing tight. The room felt heavy, the only sound the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Daniel slammed his phone back on the table, the screen lighting up with the attorney's name still visible. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I will find the crack in your armor. No trust is perfect, no defense is unbreakable, and when I find it, you'll regret ever standing in my way." I held his glare, my voice calm but unyielding. "Try, Daniel. Spend your nights digging, spend your money on lawyers, burn what's left of your empire chasing my ruin. Every move you make, I've already anticipated. Every strike you plan, I have an answer waiting. That is the difference between you and me. You scramble to survive. I prepare to endure." Grace's eyes shone with fierce pride. She whispered, almost to herself, "She will never fall. Not to him, not to anyone." The air in the dining hall was electric, charged with threats and defiance. Daniel's chest rose and fell with fury. Melissa sat shattered in silence, and I stood my ground, the weight of decades behind me. The war had moved from whispered plans to open declarations, and though Daniel believed he could tear me down through courts and lies, I knew one thing with certainty. He had underestimated me, and that would be his downfall. That night, after the chaos of dinner and the venom of Daniel's threats, I retreated to my study. The rest of the estate was silent, but silence did not mean peace. Every corner of the house seemed charged, the air heavy with words left unsaid. I closed the door gently behind me and turned on the brass lamp that had sat on my husband's desk for decades. Its warm glow spread across the room, throwing long shadows over the shelves lined with ledgers, books, and framed photographs. My eyes settled on the largest frame, the picture of my husband, Robert. His smile was steady, his arms strong around me, his eyes filled with the same determination that had built every wall of this estate. I walked toward the desk, my hand brushing over the glass, tracing the lines of his face. "Don't worry," I whispered, my voice low but unwavering. "I will protect what we built. I will not let anyone turn our life's work into debt." The words hung in the room, heavy with promise. My chest tightened, but it was not weakness. It was steel hardening. I felt his presence with me, the weight of his memory grounding me in the storm. I lowered myself into the leather chair, the one he had used when calculating harvest yields and planning shipments decades ago. The scent of old paper and oak filled my lungs, grounding me. My fingers moved over the desk, over the drawers I knew by heart. One by one, I pulled out folders, trust documents, medical evaluations, financial reports, all meticulously prepared, each one proof that I had not been blindsided by greed. I laid them across the desk like weapons, a quiet arsenal waiting to be deployed. Daniel thought he could win by calling me weak. He thought age meant confusion, fragility, decay. He did not understand that years sharpen some people and I was one of them. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a brief moment. The image of Melissa crying, accusing me of selfishness, stabbed at my heart. I had not raised her to equate worth with wealth. I had not carried her through fevered nights, stood at every recital, and cheered for every achievement so she could turn her back on everything we had built together. Yet here we were, mother and daughter standing on opposite ends of a battlefield. My heart longed to reach her, to hold her, to remind her that she was enough without Daniel, without the estate, without status. But my mind knew the truth. Until she chose to see herself clearly, no words of mine would change her path. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10. The chimes echoed faintly into the study, each strike reminding me of time passing, of battles waiting beyond this fragile pause. I straightened in my chair, opened the drawer, and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Inside were notes I had written over the past year, observations of Melissa's behavior, Daniel's desperation, whispers I had overheard about his failing company. I had documented everything, not because I wished to hurt them, but because I knew one day truth would need proof. I flipped through the pages slowly, my eyes scanning each entry, each date, each note, a breadcrumb trail leading to tonight. My hand stopped at one entry in particular, months ago, when Melissa had visited with Daniel and spent the entire evening praising his genius, while he quietly pressured her about finances. I had seen it then, the way he leaned on her insecurities, feeding her hunger for validation. I set the journal aside and returned my gaze to Robert's photograph. "You knew, didn't you?" I murmured. "You always said Melissa needed someone steady, someone who loved her for who she was. And instead, she found a man who feeds her fears. But I won't let him consume everything we built. I promise you that." The wind outside rattled the windows. The vines beyond the glass swayed in the darkness, the land itself whispering its loyalty. This estate was more than real estate. It was history rooted in the soil, and I was its guardian. My thoughts returned to Daniel's threat. A lawsuit, accusations of incompetence, the audacity of a man who barely knew me, daring to question my mind, my strength. I almost laughed aloud at the absurdity. If he thought dragging me into court would weaken me, he would learn the opposite. I would stand taller there than I had at that dinner table. But I also knew the cost. Court battles are not only about evidence, they are about endurance. And while I was prepared, I felt the fatigue of age pressing at the edges of my body. I had to be careful, measured, deliberate. Every move from this point forward had to be precise. Grace's face flashed in my mind, her loyalty burning like a torch. She had stood by me when even my daughter wavered. She had spoken truths Melissa needed to hear, though they cut deep. I knew Daniel would try to silence her, to paint her as nothing but a servant. But Grace's testimony, her decades of presence in this house, would carry weight Daniel could not erase. I placed my palm flat on the stack of trust documents. "They think I am alone," I whispered to the quiet room. "But I am not. I have allies, I have the law, and I have time on my side." The house creaked softly around me, the sounds of wood and stone settling as they had for decades. It was the sound of endurance, of permanence. I exhaled slowly, pushing back the ache in my chest. Tonight was a pause, but it was not peace. It was the space between storms, the breath before the next blow. Tomorrow would bring more conflict, more revelations, more betrayal laid bare. But tonight, in the glow of the lamp, with Robert's eyes watching over me, I anchored myself in quiet determination. I stood, walked to the photograph again, and pressed my fingers lightly against the frame. "You don't have to worry. I will not falter. I will not let them turn this estate into a pawn for their failures. I will guard it, for you, for us, for the generations that deserve better than this greed." The study fell silent again. The lamp flickered. I turned it off and walked into the hallway, the echo of my footsteps steady, resolute. This was the calm before the next strike, and I was ready. The next morning, before the sun had even burned through the Napa fog, Daniel made his move. His arrogance was not content to stay confined to our dining table or whispered phone calls with lawyers. He wanted spectacle. He wanted to humiliate me in public. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into my favorite porcelain cup, when Grace walked in, holding a folded newspaper. Her hands trembled. She laid it down in front of me without a word. The headline stole the air from the room. Prominent Napa widow, allegedly incapable of managing $53 million estate. Below it was Daniel's photograph, smiling smugly, his arm draped around Melissa as if he were already master of the estate. The article quoted him directly. "Evelyn Carter is no longer in full possession of her faculties," he had told the reporter. "For her own safety and the safety of the estate, legal guardianship should be considered. My wife and I are prepared to step in." Grace gasped when I didn't flinch. "Mrs. Carter, he has gone too far. He's trying to strip your dignity in front of the entire county." I sipped my coffee slowly, tasting the bitterness. My heart did not race. My pulse did not falter. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "When a storm comes, Grace," I said evenly, "I don't need to shout. I only need to stand firm." By noon, my phone was ringing nonstop. Distant relatives, people who had not visited in years, suddenly remembered my number. Some masked their curiosity with concern. Others were shameless. "Aunt Evelyn," one cousin said bluntly, "we read the article. Is it true you've been declining?" I let the silence hang until they squirmed. Then, in a voice calm and deliberate, I answered, "You can believe gossip, or you can believe the woman speaking to you right now. Your choice." And then I hung up. Another call came from Robert's sister, a woman who had always envied my position. "Evelyn, dear, maybe it is time to pass things down. Managing an estate that size is no small task. Don't you think Melissa deserves—" I cut her off. "This estate is not a bauble to be handed over to whoever shouts the loudest. Robert and I built it with integrity. I will not betray that legacy because outsiders are hungry for scandal." Her voice faltered. She muttered a quick goodbye. Grace hovered nearby, her face taut with anger. "How dare he, after everything you've survived? He's trying to break you by dragging your name into the mud." I reached across the table, laying my hand over hers. "Grace, men like Daniel thrive on noise. They mistake it for power, but noise fades. Truth does not." Later that afternoon, I stepped outside. The vines stretched across the hills, unwavering, despite the headlines. The earth did not care about Daniel's lies. The land responded only to care, patience, and honesty. I felt the soil beneath my shoes, grounding me more firmly than any headline could unseat me. Inside, Melissa avoided my eyes. She had seen the paper, too. I caught her in the hallway, her lips pressed tight, her face pale. For once, she did not rush to defend Daniel's actions. But she also did not apologize. She simply whispered, "Mom," before turning away. I could hear the conflict in her voice, the war inside her. She wanted to believe her husband's promises, but some part of her still remembered who I was, who I had always been. That evening, as I sat in the study again, the phone rang one last time. This time it was my attorney, Jonathan Myers, a man I had trusted for years. "Mrs. Carter," he said firmly, "I saw the paper. Don't worry, we'll respond, but not the way he expects. If Daniel wants to drag this fight into the public eye, he's stepping onto ground where evidence matters more than gossip. Let him run his mouth. We'll run the facts." I thanked him, my voice steady. Daniel believes perception is stronger than truth. He doesn't realize perception only lasts until truth arrives. When I hung up, I looked once more at Robert's photograph. His steady eyes seemed to meet mine in silent approval. "Let them talk," I said aloud, my tone sharpened with steel. "Let the headlines scream. I will not bow. I will not bend. This house, this land, this legacy, they are not Daniel's to claim, and they never will be." The night grew dark, but inside me the fire burned brighter. His public attack was nothing more than noise, and I was not afraid of noise. The article had been out for less than a day, and its poison spread quickly. Daniel strutted as if he had already won, but Melissa's face told a different story. She was restless, her steps uneven, her hands constantly fidgeting. The bravado she had worn at the dinner table was slipping away. That evening, as I sat quietly in the living room, I heard soft footsteps moving toward the kitchen. Grace followed minutes later, carrying a tray. She returned sooner than I expected, her eyes thoughtful, her expression tight. "Mrs. Carter," she said gently, "I found her in the kitchen, crying." Melissa had tried to hide it, but Grace had always been sharper than most. She carried truths in her silence, and when she spoke, her words landed with weight. I set down my book and listened as Grace continued. She stood by the sink with the paper in her hands. Her tears fell onto the ink. I told her something, though I doubt she'll admit I struck a nerve. "What did you tell her?" I asked. Grace's gaze was steady. "I told her she might win against you, but she would lose herself." I closed my eyes for a moment. The ache in my chest was sharp, but beneath it was something unexpected. Hope. Perhaps Melissa was beginning to see the cliff Daniel had led her toward. Later that night, I stepped into the hallway and found Melissa standing near the kitchen door, staring at nothing. The newspaper lay crumpled on the counter, stained with faint circles where her tears had fallen. Her back was stiff when she sensed me, her breath caught, and for a moment, I thought she would speak. But she didn't. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. The silence stretched between us like a taut rope. I did not break it. Instead, I said softly, "Melissa, when the world tells lies about me, it doesn't wound me half as much as when my own child believes them." Her shoulders flinched, but she still didn't turn around. I saw the tension in her neck, the way her hand gripped the counter as if it might steady her. "Daniel says it's for the best," she whispered at last, so faint I almost missed it. "For him, perhaps," I answered. "Not for you, and certainly not for me." She made no reply. The silence returned, heavy, suffocating. Finally, she walked away, leaving the crumpled newspaper behind. Grace found me afterward. "She heard you," she said, "even if she pretends otherwise." I nodded. Seeds take time to grow, but seeds also crack the ground when they're ready. That night, alone in my study, I thought about my daughter, the little girl who once clutched my hand at school recitals, the teenager who begged me to stay awake until she returned from dances, the woman now standing beside a man who would gladly sell her soul for debt relief. The thought stung, but I reminded myself, people can be blind and still be saved. Melissa was beginning to waver. I had seen it in her tears, in her silence, in the way she couldn't meet my eyes. She wasn't lost yet. Daniel's grip was strong, but a mother's truth could still be stronger. The war was far from over, but for the first time I felt the battlefield shift, not because of any headline or courtroom maneuver, but because my daughter's heart had begun to question the path she had chosen. The week after Daniel's public smear campaign, I called Jonathan Myers, my attorney. His office was in downtown Napa, overlooking the courthouse, a place where battles were fought not with fists, but with signatures and evidence. I arrived just before noon, the air crisp, the smell of grapes still lingering from the harvest season. Jonathan greeted me with his usual firmness. He had silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that could silence even the loudest courtroom. "Evelyn," he said, closing the door behind me, "I assume this is about the article." I nodded, sliding into the chair opposite his desk. "Daniel thinks he can make noise until the world believes it's truth. He doesn't understand I've been preparing for this moment for years." Jonathan raised a brow. "You mean the trust?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "But there's more." I pulled a leather folder from my bag and placed it between us. He opened it slowly, scanning the documents with the careful eye of a man who had seen thousands of contracts in his career. As he read, the corner of his mouth curved upward, the faintest smile breaking his usual stoicism. "You never told me you finalized this," he murmured. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. "Because it was meant to be my trump card. Daniel believes the estate is sitting safely under the Evelyn Carter Trust. He thinks if he can break me legally, he'll force his way into control. What he doesn't know is that I went one step further. Months ago, I signed the conservation easement with the Napa Valley Agricultural Land Trust. This land is no longer just mine. It belongs to history. Jonathan's eyes gleamed with approval. Which means it cannot be sold, divided, or leveraged as collateral. Not by you, not by Melissa, not by Daniel. It is protected by law permanently. Exactly, I said. Daniel could bring an army of lawyers and it wouldn't matter. The estate has been safeguarded beyond the reach of greed. For a moment, the office was silent, except for the faint hum of traffic outside. I felt my shoulders relax in a way they hadn't for weeks. I had not only defended my home, I had ensured it could never be taken by those who saw it only as a dollar sign. Jonathan tapped the folder lightly. When this comes to light, it will hit them harder than any courtroom victory. He thinks he's playing chess. He doesn't realize you already checkmated him months ago. I smiled faintly, though my chest ached at the thought of Melissa. She won't understand right away. She'll think I've robbed her, but one day she'll see this was the only way to protect her from herself. She's blinded by Daniel's desperation, and I refuse to let that blindness burn down what generations built. Jonathan leaned back, folding his hands. Are you prepared for their reaction? It won't be quiet. Daniel will rage. He'll accuse you of betrayal, of manipulation. Melissa may even side with him in the moment. I'm prepared, I answered firmly, because this isn't about me winning against them. This is about making sure Robert's legacy, and mine, survives. They can shout, they can hate, they can call me selfish, but they cannot undo the law. They cannot touch this land. As I spoke, I felt a surge of strength, the kind that comes not from anger, but from certainty. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every painful argument with Melissa, it all led here. To this decision, to this protection, to this victory that was not loud, but absolute. Jonathan closed the folder and slid it back to me. Keep this safe, though frankly, the land trust will guard it as fiercely as you do. Daniel's lawsuit will crumble the second this surfaces. He'll have no ground to stand on. I rose to leave, gripping the folder tightly. At the door, I turned back. Let him think he still has a chance. Let him plan his attack. And when the time is right, we'll reveal the truth. Jonathan's smile widened slightly. Evelyn, I almost feel sorry for him. Almost. As I stepped out into the sunlight, the weight on my chest eased. The estate stretched across the hills behind me, its vines rooted deeper than Daniel's greed could ever reach. He thought he was circling his prey. He had no idea I'd already locked the gates. Driving back home, I whispered to myself, this is not just my victory. This is justice. And deep inside, I knew. The battle was far from over, but the war had already been decided. It was late afternoon when I heard the gravel outside crunch under unfamiliar fury. The front gate had been left open, and the sound of car doors slamming echoed across the courtyard. A few moments later, the door burst open. Daniel stormed in, dragging Melissa behind him like a soldier hauling a prisoner. His face was flushed red, veins standing out at his temples, eyes blazing with the kind of rage that belongs not to reason, but to desperation. He didn't wait for pleasantries. He didn't even pause to notice the calm silence of the house. His voice exploded before he even crossed the threshold into my sitting room. "You destroyed this family," he screamed, his finger stabbing the air in my direction. "You poisoned your own daughter against me. You ruined everything we were building." Melissa flinched at his volume, her hand trembling where he gripped her wrist. Her eyes darted toward me, but she said nothing. I stayed seated. My spine straightened against the high back of the chair, my palms folded on my lap. I did not shout back. I did not move. When I finally spoke, my voice was firm, low, and carried more weight than his fury ever could. "Family," I said evenly, "is not a backyard you borrow to pay off your debts." Daniel froze, his mouth open, his fury momentarily muted by the sharpness of the words. Melissa's breath caught, as though she had been holding it for days. I rose slowly from my chair, letting the silence draw tight like a rope between us. My eyes found Melissa's, and for the first time in weeks, I looked straight through the mask she had been wearing. Her shoulders shook. The newspaper headlines, the accusations, the lies, they were catching up with her, and I knew this was the moment she could no longer stand on both sides. "Melissa," I said, my voice cutting clean through the air, "you have to choose, not between me and Daniel, between Daniel and your own dignity." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes, sliding down her cheeks silently. Daniel tugged her arm, pulling her closer to his side, snarling like a cornered animal. "She doesn't have to choose," he spat. "She's my wife. Her loyalty is to me now, not to some old woman who's lost her grip on reality." Grace stepped into the room then, her apron still on, a tray in her hands that she promptly set aside with a sharp clatter. Her voice shook with righteous anger. "Mr. Daniel," she said, her words like knives, "if the master of this house were alive, he would hang his head at the sight of you, dragging his daughter into ruin, shouting lies inside the very walls he built. You speak of family, but you know nothing of it." Daniel's face twisted. He turned on Grace, his hand twitching as though he would lash out, but I stepped forward before he could move. "Enough," I said, steel in my tone. "You came here to scream at me, to play the victim of your own failures. But this is not your battlefield, Daniel. You don't get to claim this house, this family, or this future, not while I breathe." His jaw worked, his chest heaving with the effort to keep his anger contained. I could see it, the cracks forming. He had bet everything on intimidation, on fear, and for the first time he realized none of it touched me. Melissa's sobs grew louder, her body shaking. She pulled her wrist free from his grip and finally looked at me, her face pale, her eyes broken. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of everything. "I don't know what to do." I held her gaze, my own voice steady. "Do what is right. Not for me, not for him, for yourself. Because if you lose your dignity, Melissa, you will have nothing left to hold on to." The room fell silent. Even Daniel, furious as he was, could not find words to pierce the stillness. Melissa's sobs softened into gasps. She turned toward him, her eyes filled with something new, doubt. For the first time, I saw the bond between them tremble, not because I had torn it apart, but because truth had finally slipped through the cracks of Daniel's control. I stood tall, unflinching, my voice the final strike in the silence. "This estate is no longer your bargaining chip. This family will not be your shield. And this daughter of mine, she is not your possession." Daniel's fury sputtered out like a flame starved of air. He clenched his fists, muttered curses under his breath, and stormed out the door, the sound of his car tearing down the drive. Melissa stayed behind, her tears falling freely now, her knees buckling as Grace rushed to catch her. And I knew then, the battle was not finished, but Daniel had lost the ground he thought he owned. It happened faster than even I expected. Within weeks, the cracks Daniel had tried to plaster over split wide open, and his empire, if one could ever call it that, began to collapse under its own lies. The news came like dominoes falling one after another. First, the bank froze his accounts, demanding repayment on loans he had recklessly tied to assets he did not own. Then investors pulled out, leaving his startup hollowed and gasping. Contracts he had once boasted about, deals he claimed would make him the next Silicon Valley success, were severed in cold, curt emails. Daniel spiraled. His swagger vanished, replaced by frantic phone calls, slammed doors, and nights spent pacing like a caged animal. I watched from afar, never needing to raise a hand. The law and truth had already done my work for me. Melissa, however, was not spared the spectacle. She stood beside him as his foundation crumbled, but with each passing day, I saw her face shift. The fear that once held her in place was loosening. The illusion Daniel had spun around her, the promise of wealth, prestige, and status, was unraveling in front of her eyes. One evening, I was told by Grace, Melissa sat in their living room, surrounded by unopened bills, the silence broken only by Daniel's curses. He slammed his fist against the table, shouting with venom, "If it weren't for your mother, I could have saved everything. She's the reason I'm drowning. She ruined me." His voice carried through the walls, but Melissa's reply was nothing like the trembling apologies she once gave. She looked at him, cold, steady, her tears dried into something far sharper. "Don't you dare blame her," she said, her voice low but cutting. "You gambled everything. You lied to me. You used me." Grace, who overheard, told me later that Daniel froze as if slapped. He shouted again, but the edge in his voice was weaker, brittle. For the first time, Melissa didn't flinch. She didn't bow. She didn't plead. She simply stared at him with the clarity of a woman who had finally awakened from a nightmare. When Melissa came to see me the next morning, her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, but there was steel in her tone. She didn't beg for forgiveness, not yet, but she no longer defended him. "He says you destroyed him," she murmured, standing in my doorway. I met her gaze calmly. "No, he destroyed himself. All I did was refuse to let him take me down with him." Her lips trembled, but she didn't argue. For once, she could see what I had seen all along. Daniel wasn't a savior dragged down by circumstance. He was a sinking ship that had tried to pull her under. Over the next days, the headlines shifted. Daniel's name was attached to words like bankruptcy, fraud investigations, and failed leadership. His phone calls went unanswered. His so-called friends vanished into the shadows. The louder he screamed, the emptier the room became. Melissa watched all of it unfold. The glossy life she thought she was building shattered, leaving her holding nothing but shards. She looked at me across the table one night, her voice barely audible. "Mom, all this time, I thought he was fighting for us, but he was only fighting for himself." I nodded slowly. "Now you see, Melissa, love does not demand you sell your soul, and family does not demand you sell your bloodline." For the first time, her eyes did not turn away from mine. They held steady, cold, but alive, with something new, awakening. Daniel's downfall was complete, and Melissa's awakening was just beginning. Melissa came to me one evening, her footsteps hesitant in the hallway, as though every board creaked louder beneath her weight. I was seated in the parlor, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the room, when she finally stepped inside. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, and before I could speak, she fell to her knees before me. Her voice cracked like dry wood under pressure. "Mom," she whispered, her hands clutching mine as though holding on to life itself. "I let his ambition blind me. I let it drown out the blood that binds us. I betrayed you." The words hit like arrows, not because they surprised me, but because they carried the weight of a daughter's shame. Her tears fell hot against my hands. For a long moment, I said nothing. I let her cry, let the sound of her regret fill the room that had known so much silence and tension. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, even, but it cut through the heaviness like steel through fog. "Melissa, forgiveness is not earned with tears alone. It is lived, day after day, by what you choose from this moment on." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, searching for mercy. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging for it." I bent down, taking her trembling hands firmly in mine. "Melissa," I said softly, though every syllable carried iron beneath it. "I forgive you. Not because what you did was small, but because you are my daughter, and I will not let bitterness define us. But hear me clearly. From this day forward, you will build with your own hands. No shortcuts, no borrowed power, no man's ambition disguising itself as your own." Her sobs broke again, but this time there was release in them, like a dam finally giving way. She pressed her forehead against my lap, her voice muffled. "I'll try, Mom. I'll prove I can." Behind her, Grace stood silently in the doorway, her eyes glistening. She had watched everything from the beginning, the greed, the betrayal, the fights, the truth revealed. Now she stood still, as though afraid that even a whisper might shatter this fragile truce. Tears slid down her cheeks, not of sorrow this time, but of relief. "You're both stronger than you know," Grace said softly, her voice breaking. "I've seen storms tear families apart, but maybe this storm has passed." Melissa rose unsteadily, still gripping my hands. She sat beside me on the couch, her shoulders shaking. I smoothed a strand of hair from her face, just as I had when she was a child. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl again, the one who used to run into my arms after a scraped knee, the one who once believed my embrace could shield her from everything. "I thought following him made me strong," she admitted, her voice raw. "But it only made me weak. I see that now." I turned her chin gently so she had to look into my eyes. "Strength is not in taking what others built. It is in building something of your own, no matter how small, and standing tall beside it. That's what I want for you, Melissa. Not wealth, not titles, dignity." Her nod was small but steady. "I'll learn." The room was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of tension. It was the silence that follows a storm, the heavy air slowly clearing, the promise of calm finally settling in. Grace dabbed her eyes with her apron, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe she had lived to see it. I held Melissa's hand tighter, not as a woman wronged, but as a mother who had fought to keep her child from drowning. And for the first time in a long while, I believed she might actually swim. The reconciliation was not perfect, not easy, and certainly not final. Wounds like these do not vanish overnight. But as the lamp flickered gently beside us, I knew this much. The storm had not destroyed us. It had stripped us bare, forced us to face truths we had long avoided, and left us standing, scarred, but still standing, together. And that, I thought, was enough to begin again. The sun dipped low that evening, staining the horizon with streaks of amber and gold. I sat on the wide porch with Grace, the scent of ripe grapes drifting through the air. The vineyard shimmered in the last light of the day, every leaf a reminder of battles fought and survived. The estate, untouched, stood as steady as I felt inside. Grace poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me. Her hands trembled slightly, though her eyes were soft. "You did it, Mrs. Carter. You held it all together when it should have broken apart." I took the glass, the cool stem firm against my palm. "No," I answered, my voice steady. "I simply refuse to let go. That's not the same as winning. It's choosing to endure." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't weigh heavy but soothes. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Melissa. She moved quietly through the dining hall, clearing plates, folding napkins, carrying dishes one by one. There was no grandeur in her movements, no demand for recognition, just quiet diligence. The arrogance that once clung to her posture was gone. She glanced toward me once, as if to speak, but instead lowered her head and continued working. Grace followed my gaze. "She's changing," she murmured. I nodded slowly. Pain changes people, but so does truth. She'll carry both for a long time. The wind shifted, cool against my face. I raised my glass slightly, watching the light refract through the deep red liquid. "People think silence is weakness," I said. "But sometimes, silence is the sharpest strength. It listens when others scream. It waits while others burn themselves out. And in the end, it remains when the noise is gone." Grace exhaled, a soft sound that was half relief, half exhaustion. I hope Melissa holds on to that lesson. Otherwise, "She will," I interrupted gently. "She has to, because she's learned the cost of not listening." We clinked glasses lightly, the sound crisp in the twilight. The vineyard stretched endlessly before us, the same land Robert and I once walked, planning rows and seasons, never imagining the day it would become a battlefield. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering his steady hand in mine. I whispered inwardly, almost as though he could still hear, "We kept it safe. No one took it from us." When I opened my eyes again, Melissa was at the doorway, watching us. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. There was no arrogance in her face now, only humility, the fragile kind born after pride is stripped away. I lifted my chin toward her, a silent acknowledgement. She bowed her head slightly, then slipped away into the kitchen. Grace touched my arm lightly. Storms end, and when they do, the air always feels cleaner. Yes, I agreed, my voice strong but calm. Justice doesn't shout. It doesn't flaunt itself. It waits, it works, and when the time is right, it stands unshaken. That's all it ever needs to do. I leaned back, letting the last rays of sunlight wash over me. The war was done. The estate was safe. My daughter had stumbled but begun her path toward redemption. And I had proven that preparation, patience, and quiet resolve outlast even the loudest greed. The evening ended with nothing more dramatic than the sound of crickets beginning their song. Yet in that quiet, I felt the full weight of victory. Not the loud, fleeting kind, but the lasting kind that seeps into the bones and tells you, without a doubt, that you stood your ground and the world bent around it.